Hey everybody, a little bit of a different video today. We're going to be taking a look at the basic structure of how we're going to put this dialogue system in. We're going to look at how Ink interfaces with Unity by taking a look at the basic example script that they give us. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about best practices so that you can take some of your ideas and make what I call a recipe book so that you know how to use them going forward. So let's get right into it. Hey everybody, welcome back. So we're going to continue talking about dialogue here, and this video is going to be a little bit loosey-goosey, which I know some people don't like, but I also figured it was a good opportunity for you to have a bit of a peek behind the scenes to see how I structure things when I'm making a tutorial. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of review where we were last time. So we made this dialog window that uses a scroll rect to contain a text component and something similar for the buttons. And I kind of liked how it looked kind of off to the side here. It doesn't quite fit the art style. The size of the pixels isn't the same in the UI as it is in the scene, but it's fine for our purposes. So what I want to do here is I want to take a look really quickly at the Ink Unity plugin, just to talk about how they have things structured, so we can then talk about how we should have things structured. Now, I don't have anything actually loaded up. I forgot to open up my Visual Studio. So I'm going to open up this basic Ink example script that comes with the Ink Unity plugin. And yeah, I'll meet you back here in just a moment. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio. This is the basic Ink example script that comes with the Unity Ink plugin. And we're just going to kind of take a look at exactly what's going on in here. So, go away. I like in their comment they even say this is a super bare bones example. So essentially what's happening here is we're creating all of their variables are down at the bottom, not variables, they're objects are down at the bottom, which I don't know, kind of bugs me seeing that because I like to have them at the top, but it doesn't matter. So they're creating a few different things. First, they're creating a text asset, which is a Unity object. A Unity object is a text asset. It's just one great big long string of text. They're also creating a story, and the story comes from, if you highlight over here, you can see it comes from the Ink runtime. Story is a core class that represents a complete Ink narrative and manages the evaluation and state of it. So this keeps track of the state of the Ink narrative that we wrote kind of in the background. So this is what the Ink story is going to be. However, the text asset needs to be there because it takes the story and turns it into a text asset as something that can be read or written to dialogue. We have canvas, we have our text prefab, and we have our button prefab. Now, the way that they're doing this is they're using a button and a text. I'm going to be using these as game objects, so it's easier to instantiate them. But let's kind of take a look at what's happening here. So they have those general variables that they're creating of the objects. The main thing that's happening here is start story. So start story creates a new story, which is a story that is created from the Ink JSON asset.txt. What that means is if we take a look back here in Unity, where I was making my dialogue stuff here. So I have my story, which is my Ink story, and then I have my text asset, which is a JSON asset, which has all the formatting for the actual story inside of it. So this counts as the text asset, but the story is what the Ink runtime creates out of that text asset. So I'm going to have some way to make a reference to the text asset. Next, it checks to see if onCreateStory is null, onCreateStory. So what that means is if there is a story, then create a story using the story. Now, and then it refreshes the view. So refresh the view creates a lot of stuff. First, it removes the children, which we're going to have to do for the buttons, but not necessarily for the text. Then while the story can continue, and this is that ink story, it is going to make the text equal to whatever the next part of the story is. Now, rather than making the text equal to that, I'm going to be adding new text objects that are going to make it so that you can kind of scroll around and see the whole of the story. And then trimming it removes any white space, and then create content view text. And create content view here essentially just creates the prefab as a text. So it's removing all of the old text and creating a new one, and then setting its parent to be the canvas. Then if there are choices in the story, so if story.currentChoices.count, which is the number of choices the story has, is greater than 0, it is going to go through all of those choices and make a new button for each choice. And when it creates the button, it's going to add a listener and tell that button what value it should pass in when you press the button itself. Then this is also managing when those buttons are pressed. So if a button is pressed and it's, say, choice 1, then it's going to do story.chooseChoiceIndex. Holy cow, for some reason this naming convention just sticks out to me as something that's interesting. Choose choice index, choice.index. So it'll choose a choice in the story based on the index that the button has. So if it's the second button, it'll choose choice 2. If it's the first button, it'll choose choice 1, or rather 0 and 1, but you know what I mean. And then it'll refresh the view again. Now we're going to do something incredibly similar to this, but I felt like it was worth taking a tiny bit of time just to go over how this is. The other part of peeking behind kind of the scenes here for my method of doing things is how I actually create the tutorials and how I make things for myself in general. So one thing that I have is I do Google Docs for pretty much everything as far as my work goes. And so I've just kind of gotten to use them for everything else as well. And I cannot remember the last time I used Microsoft Word or whatever the Mac equivalent is. It's been a long time because I use Google for everything. So here's what I do. When I learn or think of a new way to do something in Unity, and I'm always learning or thinking of a new way to do things in Unity, I'll open a new doc and I'll make what I consider to be like a recipe. And this recipe is, well, how did I do this, or how do I think I can do this? And then I'll make a set of instructions for myself. I think I never actually in this tutorial series stopped to talk about how you should be using this, because once we go over something, I don't expect you to know exactly how to do it. You have it somewhere. You did it once, but you're not going to know how to do it again necessarily. So just like I'd have my students take notes in class, I often like to take notes for myself, and I definitely suggest that you guys take notes as well. Thinking about it now, that's probably something I should have suggested way earlier in the series. But yeah, so essentially here's what my notes for myself say. First, I want to make sure, first I make a dialog value that's a scriptable object, because we're going to have to be able to pass a dialog value from the NPC to the scene itself, because we need to have some way of telling the story what text asset to use to make the story from. The story manager telling it what text asset to make the story from. So I made this in my test version of this, I made this as a scriptable object. So the NPC would have like dialogue, and then if the player is in range and they press a button, then we would activate the dialogue, and we would tell the dialogue manager which dialogue to activate by using this scriptable object. And the scriptable object is just like the float value or the sprite value. All it is just a container to hold a reference to a dialogue. And then it'll raise a notification to tell the dialogue manager, hey, something's happened. You need to check to see if there's a story in that asset, or if there's a text asset in that variable. And if there is, you need to, go forward. And then, let's see, a note to myself to say that you need to make sure that you're using ink.runtime. And then this is essentially what I made as we'll go over all of this in the next video. I just want to explain my thoughts here. Creating a text asset as a scriptable object, and then making an object in the scene be the dialog manager. And that dialog manager is going to keep track of the story, the text assets, the prefabs for everything, and then kind of go through the code that Ink included so that we can actually create this. Okay. All right, so that's a pretty short video for today, but I just kind of wanted to go over like the structure of things. So in the game itself, we're going to have an NPC. The NPC is going to have some interactable component so that if the player is in range and then the player presses a button, it's going to tell the dialog manager to check the current dialogue, and if there is a current dialogue in there, then engage in the dialogue stuff, make the canvas active and create the dialogue and create the choices. And then from there, we'll use the dialog manager to keep track of the choice buttons and everything. So all right, so that's pretty much it for this video. I wanted to kind of go over the structure and how I want to try to implement it, and then also talk about some practices that I've found to help me out in the past and that might help you guys out. The next video will be actually putting all of this into practice, because there's kind of a lot to go through if you've never seen Ink before, and I didn't want it to be like an hour-long video. So that's it for today. We'll have another video on this probably in the next 2 to 3 days, and then we'll go from there. So thanks very much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day. All right, thanks very much for watching. I hope you learned something. Feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons down there if you did learn something. You can share this to your social media platform if you think somebody you know might want to learn it. You can click the bell icon. Just go nuts on those buttons down there. There's so many buttons. Why not try pushing them all? Except for maybe dislike. Maybe leave that one alone. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you open up the description, you can see that I have provided links to my Patreon, where if you want to chuck in a buck to make sure these videos keep coming, you sure can. My Discord channel, where not just me, but other people are chatting every day, kind of helping people out who are trying to learn this whole trade. You can find my itch.io page, where I have some assets and some general frameworks. And yeah, there's also some kind of general use links down there, so feel free to check out that description. Otherwise, I hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful day.